The maintenance bay of Orbital Station Harmony never truly slept. Even at this late hour, the sounds of machinery and distant voices echoed through the massive space. Sparks flew from welding torches as the night crew worked on damaged cargo vessels. The smell of hot metal and engine oil filled the air. Tae-sung pushed his cleaning cart through the bay, moving between the workers and their equipment. His movements were slow and methodical. At 45 years old, his body carried the weight of too many battles and too many losses. The scars on his hands told stories he never spoke about. The limp in his left leg reminded him every day of the war he'd left behind 5 years ago. Nobody paid attention to the janitor. That was fine with Tae-sung. He preferred being invisible. After the frontier wars, after losing his entire unit, after months of surgery and therapy, he'd chosen the quietest job he could find. Cleaning floors on a space station was about as far from combat as a man could get. He made his way to the waste disposal area near the back of the bay. This was always his last stop before calling it a night. The area was dark and forgotten, filled with broken equipment and containers waiting to be processed. Tae-sung had just started sorting through the items when something caught his eye. A transport crate sat near the disposal chute. It wasn't marked for processing. Someone had just left it there, pushed against a wall like they wanted it to disappear. The crate was small, barely the size of a storage box, but something about it felt wrong. Tae-sung's old military instincts kicked in. He approached carefully, listening. There was a sound coming from inside the crate, a soft scratching noise. Something alive. His scarred hands reached for the latch. The crate wasn't locked. That was strange. Anything valuable would be secured. Anything dangerous would have warning labels. This crate had nothing, just a plain shipping container that someone wanted to forget about. The lid opened with a soft click. Inside, curled up on a bed of torn fabric, was a dragon hatchling. Tae-sung had seen dragons before. Everyone had. They were one of the oldest species in the galaxy, protected by every major council and treaty. Seeing one up close was rare. Seeing one this small was almost impossible. The hatchling was tiny, no bigger than a house cat. Its scales shimmered in the dim light, changing from deep violet to bright silver as it moved. But something was wrong with it. The creature's left wing was twisted, bent at an unnatural angle. The wing was smaller than the right one, malformed from birth. The baby dragon lifted its head weakly. Its eyes were the strangest thing about it. They looked ancient, filled with intelligence that shouldn't exist in something so young. Those eyes met Tae-sung's gaze and held it. The dragon made a small sound, somewhere between a chirp and a whimper. It was starving. Tae-sung could see its ribs through the thin scales. He noticed a piece of paper attached to the inside of the crate lid. The message was short and cold. Defective. Cannot fly. Dispose accordingly. Tae-sung's hands tightened on the edge of the crate. He'd seen messages like this before. During the war, medics like him would receive wounded soldiers marked with similar tags. Critical. Unlikely to survive. Minimal resources. Those were the ones they were supposed to let go. Save the medicine and equipment for soldiers who had a better chance. Tae-sung had never followed those orders. He'd tried to save everyone, even when it cost him sleep and sanity, even when it cost him his team. He looked at the dragon again. The creature was still watching him with those impossibly old eyes. It knew what that message meant. Somehow, this baby knew it had been thrown away. Station protocol was clear. Any discovery of protected species had to be reported immediately. Dragons especially, even disabled ones. There were forms to fill out, officials to contact, proper channels to follow. But Tae-sung knew what would happen. He'd seen how bureaucracy worked. The station would contact the Conservation Council. Inspectors would come. They'd look at the twisted wing and the medical costs. They'd use words like quality of life and humane solution. Then they'd put the hatchling down, call it mercy, and file it away as proper procedure. The dragon made that small sound again. Its good wing trembled with the effort of staying upright. Tae-sung looked around the maintenance bay. The night crew was focused on their work, too far away to notice one janitor and one forgotten crate. The security cameras in this section had been broken for weeks. Nobody came to this corner of the bay unless they had to. He'd spent 5 years trying to disappear. 5 years trying to forget what it felt like to be responsible for another life. 5 years avoiding anything that might remind him of the soldiers he couldn't save. But here was this creature, broken and abandoned, looking at it with eyes that understood rejection, looking at him like he was the last chance at survival. Tae-sung made his decision. He carefully lifted the crate, tucking it under his arm. The dragon didn't struggle. It seemed to understand that he was helping, not hurting. Tae-sung covered the crate with a cleaning tarp from his cart and started pushing toward the exit. His heart hammered in his chest. Every step felt too loud. Every worker he passed might notice. Every security checkpoint might stop him. But nobody looked twice at the tired janitor heading home after his shift. The walk to his quarters in Section D felt like it took hours. In reality, it was only 10 minutes. Section D was where the station housed its lower-level workers. The quarters were small, barely more than a bedroom with a tiny bathroom and kitchenette. But it was private. That was all that mattered right now. Tae-sung locked the door behind him and set the crate on his bunk. He opened it again, and the dragon looked up at him. In the better light of his quarters, he could see more details. The scales weren't just violet and silver. They had hints of blue and gold mixed in. The good wing, when the dragon stretched it slightly, was translucent and beautiful, but that twisted left wing remained curled against its body, useless. "What am I going to do with you?" Tae-sung asked quietly. The dragon tilted its head, as if considering the question. Then it made a different sound, softer than before, almost like it was trying to answer. Tae-sung sat down heavily on the floor. His old combat injury ached from the long shift. His hands, scarred from burns and shrapnel, rested on his knees. He was 45 years old, living alone on a space station, cleaning floors to avoid thinking about the past. And now, he had a dragon. A disabled dragon that would never fly. A creature that someone had decided was worthless. A life that the galaxy had marked for disposal. He thought about his team. The soldiers he'd served with during the war. Young men and women who trusted him to keep them alive. He'd failed them. They'd died and he'd survived, and the guild had been eating him alive ever since. But maybe, just maybe, he could save this one small life. The dragon crawled out of the crate slowly, favoring its good side. It moved across the floor toward Tae-sung, its claws clicking softly on the metal surface. When it reached him, it pressed against his leg and made that soft sound again. Tae-sung reached down with his scarred hand and gently touched the dragon's head. The scales were warm and smooth. The creature leaned into his touch, and he felt it relax for the first time. "I'll figure something out," he promised quietly. "You're not defective. You're just different. And different doesn't mean worthless." The dragon's ancient eyes closed slowly, trustingly. Within minutes, it was asleep against Tae-sung's leg, breathing deeply for the first time since being abandoned. Tae-sung sat there on the floor of his small quarters, listening to the dragon breathe. Outside his window, the stars turned slowly. The station continued its endless orbit. And somewhere in the bureaucracy of the galaxy, a disabled dragon hatchling was marked as disposed of and forgotten. But here, in this small room in Section D, a broken veteran and a broken dragon had found each other, and neither of them was alone anymore. 3 weeks had passed since Tae-sung brought the dragon home. 3 weeks of careful planning and constant worry. Every morning started the same way. He'd wait before his shift and check the storage locker he'd converted into a nest. The dragon would be curled up inside, waiting for him with those ancient, knowing eyes. Tae-sung had used old blankets and heating pads to make the space comfortable. The locker was just big enough for the small dragon to move around. He drilled tiny air holes in the back and installed a water dish that wouldn't spill. It wasn't perfect, but it was safe and hidden. The hardest part was feeding the dragon. Tae-sung spent hours searching through encrypted databases, using his old veteran access codes. Nobody had bothered to remove his military clearance after he'd left service. Now those codes let him access information about dragon nutrition and care. He learned that young dragons needed protein, minerals, and certain supplements to grow properly. Getting the supplies without raising suspicion took creativity. He ordered protein powder meant for human athletes. He bought mineral supplements from the station pharmacy, claiming they were for his own health. He mixed everything together based on the ratios he'd found in the database. The dragon ate it eagerly, making small chirping sounds between bites. The dragon was getting stronger. That was good, but it was also getting bigger. That was a problem. In 3 weeks, the creature had grown from the size of a house cat to something closer to a medium dog. Its scales had become brighter, more vibrant. The violet and silver colors now had hints of gold that caught the light. The good wing had developed beautiful translucent membranes, but the twisted left wing remained small and bent, growing slower than the rest of the body. Taesung had started calling the dragon Hanul. It meant sky in his native language. He knew it was ironic, naming a flightless dragon after the sky, but something about it felt right. Just because Hanul couldn't fly didn't mean he couldn't dream about it. Each evening after work, Taesung would sit on the floor of his quarters. Hanul would curl up against his leg, that same position from the first night. The dragon would purr, a sound like distant thunder in a bottle. It was the most peaceful sound Taesung had heard in years. During these quiet moments, memories would surface. Memories Taesung usually kept buried deep. He'd been a combat medic during the frontier wars. His job was saving lives while bullets and plasma fire tore through the air around him. He'd been good at it. Too good, maybe. He'd saved dozens of soldiers who should have died. But he couldn't save his own unit. The Battle of Proxima 7 had been a massacre. Enemy forces had surrounded them. Taesung had worked for hours, treating wounds, stopping bleeding, keeping hearts pumping. But there were too many injuries and not enough time. One by one, his team had died. The last one had been a young soldier who'd asked Taesung to tell his family he'd been brave. Taesung had held that boy's hand until there was nothing left to hold on to. After the war, the guild had carved holes in Taesung's soul, holes that never quite filled up. He'd stopped trying to save anything or anyone. It hurt too much to care. It was easier to just clean floors and stay invisible. But then he'd found Hanul, and something about this broken dragon made it impossible not to care. The sound of his door chime broke through Taesung's thoughts. His heart jumped. Nobody visited him. Nobody knew where he lived except for one person. Boram stood in the hallway when he opened the door. She was carrying a deck of cards and wearing her usual tired smile. Boram was the station's medical officer and the only person Taesung considered friend. She was in her late 30s, sharp-eyed and observant. They'd met in the station cafeteria a few years ago and had started playing cards every Friday night. Ready to lose again? Boram asked, walking in without waiting for an invitation. Taesung's mind raced. Hanul was in the storage locker. The locker was closed, but Boram noticed everything. She was a doctor, trained to see details others missed. She set the cards on a small table and looked around the room. Her nose wrinkled slightly. "Do you have a pet?" she asked casually. "No," Taesung said too quickly. Boram's eyes narrowed. She walked slowly around the room, still smiling but definitely suspicious. She noticed a modified storage locker. She noticed the faint sulfurous smell that all dragons carried. She noticed the way Taesung was standing between her and the locker. "Taesung," she said quietly, her smile fading. "What have you done?" He could lie. He could make up some story. But Boram deserved better than lies. And honestly, he was tired of hiding. Tired of being alone with a secret. Without saying anything, Taesung walked to the storage locker and opened it. Hanul looked up at them both. The dragon had grown enough that the locker was getting cramped. His violet-silver scales shimmered in the light. His ancient eyes moved from Taesung to Boram and back again. Boram's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at the dragon for a long moment. Then she looked at Taesung. "Do you have any idea how much trouble you're in?" she finally asked. "Yes," he said simply. "Do you know what they'll do if they find him?" "Yes." "Do you know what they'll do to you?" "I don't care." Boram closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, her expression had changed. Instead of anger or fear, there was something else. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. She knelt down slowly in front of the locker. Hanul watched her carefully but didn't move away. Boram extended her hand, letting the dragon sniff her fingers. After a moment, Hanul pressed his snout against her palm. His wing is deformed, she observed. Born that way, Tae-sung confirmed. That's why someone abandoned him. Yes. Bo-Ram ran her fingers gently along Hanul's scales, her medical training taking over. She checked his eyes, his breathing, the way he moved. She examined the twisted wing carefully, her touch gentle and professional. He's malnourished but recovering, she said. You've been doing a decent job with the feeding, but you need better supplements. The ones you're using aren't complete. Tae-sung's throat felt tight. You're not going to report this? Bo-Ram sat back on her heels and looked up at him. I should. Following regulations, I absolutely should report this immediately. But I see something in your face that I haven't seen in 5 years. You look alive again. You look like you have a reason to wake up in the morning. She turned back to Hanul, and this little one looks at you like you're his whole world. She stood up and brushed off her knees. I can access the veterinary supplies without raising any flags. I'll get you proper dragon supplements. Better heating equipment, too. That locker is going to be too small soon. Bo-Ram if we get caught. We'll both get airlocked. I know, but I've been a doctor long enough to know that some rules are meant to be broken, especially rules that say lives don't matter if they're not perfect. Tae-sung wanted to thank her, wanted to explain how much this meant, but the words stuck in his throat. Bo-Ram seemed to understand anyway. She picked up her cards and sat down at the table. Are we playing or not? I still plan to take all your credits. They played cards like they did every Friday. But now Hanul was out of the locker, curled up on the floor between them. The dragon watched the game with interest, his head moving back and forth as cards were played. At one point, Hanul reached out with one claw and tapped a card on the table. It was exactly the card Tae-sung needed to win the hand. Bo-Ram stared at the dragon, then at Tae-sung. Did he just... I think so, Tae-sung said quietly. How long has he been doing that? This is the first time. Bo-Ram leaned back in her chair. Tae-sung, I don't think you understand what you have here. Dragons are intelligent, but hatchlings this young shouldn't be able to understand complex games. They shouldn't be able to read situations like that. What does it mean? It means he's special. Really special. Maybe the twisted wing changed something in his development. Maybe he's compensating for not being able to fly by developing his mind faster. She looked at Hanul with new respect. Whatever the reason, this dragon is extraordinary. Hanul made his purring sound, pleased with the attention. He moved closer to Tae-sung and pressed against his leg in that familiar way. We need to be more careful, Bo-Ram said seriously. If anyone finds out about him now, they won't just dispose of him. They'll want to study him, take him away to some research facility. You'd never see him again. Then we don't let anyone find out, Tae-sung said firmly. Agreed. Bo-Ram gathered her cards. I'll bring those supplies tomorrow. And Tae-sung, you did a good thing, saving him. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. After she left, Tae-sung sat on the floor with Hanul. The dragon had grown so much in just 3 weeks. Soon the storage locker wouldn't be enough. Soon it would be harder to hide him. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, Tae-sung wasn't alone. He had a friend who understood, and he had a dragon who trusted him. For the first time in 5 years, Tae-sung felt like maybe, just maybe, he was doing something right. Hanul's purring filled the small room like distant thunder, and Tae-sung finally allowed himself to hope. For months had changed everything. Hanul was no longer the tiny hatchling Tae-sung had found in that crate. The dragon had grown to the size of a medium dog, his body strong and healthy. His scales shimmered with brilliant colors now, violet and silver mixed with gold and hints of deep blue. The good wing had developed fully, beautiful and powerful. But the twisted left wing remained stunted, bent at that same wrong angle, growing slower than the rest of him. Hanul's personality had bloomed along with his body. He was curious about everything, always investigating new objects in the quarters. He was intelligent in ways that surprised Tae-sung daily. The dragon had learned to understand basic commands in multiple languages. He could solve simple puzzles that Tae-sung created for him. He even seemed to understand when he needed to be quiet because someone was walking past the door. But the bigger Hanul grew, the harder it became to hide him. The storage locker was far too small now. Tae-sung had given up on trying to keep him contained. Instead, Hanul had free run of the small quarters. The dragon had claimed the space under the bunk as his sleeping spot. He'd arranged the blankets there into a proper nest. Boram visited regularly now, bringing better food and supplies. She'd smuggled in specialized dragon supplements from the veterinary storage. She brought heating lamps and toys designed for intelligent animals. She even brought books about dragon behavior, though most of them were outdated or wrong about many things. He's not following the normal development patterns, Boram said one evening, watching Hanul solve a puzzle box she'd brought. The dragon used his claws to manipulate the locks. His ancient eyes focused intently on the mechanism. Hatchlings' age should still be mostly instinctive. But look at him. He's planning. He's thinking through the problem. Tae-sung watched Hanul successfully open the box and retrieve the treat inside. The dragon made his pleased purring sound and brought the treat back to share with Tae-sung, something he always did. Maybe it's because of the wing, Tae-sung suggested. You said he might be compensating. Maybe, or maybe he's just extraordinary. Boram smiled softly. Either way, we need to be more careful. I've heard rumors. Tae-sung's stomach tightened. What kind of rumors? Security has been picking up unusual energy signatures in the residential sections. Dragons emit a specific bioelectric field. It's faint, but detectable with the right equipment. How much time do we have? I don't know. Could be days. Could be weeks. But Jae-ho is personally conducting the investigation. Tae-sung knew that name. Everyone on the station knew Jae-ho. He was a security chief, a man in his early 50s with a reputation for following every rule precisely. He was efficient, thorough, and completely by the book. We're in trouble, Tae-sung said quietly. That trouble arrived faster than expected. 2 days later, Tae-sung was cleaning his quarters when his door chime rang unexpectedly. He looked at Hanul, who was lying under the bunk. The dragon understood immediately. He'd practiced this. Hanul stayed perfectly still and quiet. Tae-sung opened the door. Jae-ho stood in the hallway with a handheld scanning device. The security chief was tall and stern-looking, his uniform perfectly pressed. His face showed no emotion. Veteran Tae-sung, Jae-ho said formally, random habitat inspection. May I enter? It wasn't really a question. Tae-sung stepped aside, his heart pounding so hard he was sure Jae-ho could hear it. The security chief walked slowly through the small quarters, his scanner in hand. The device beeped softly as it measured energy levels. Tae-sung watched him move closer to the storage locker, then to the bunk where Hanul was hiding underneath. You keep your quarters very clean, Jae-ho observed, his eyes scanning every corner. Old military habits, Tae-sung managed to say. His voice sounded almost normal. The scanner beeped more loudly near the storage locker. Jae-ho stopped, his eyes narrowing. He looked at the locker, then at Tae-sung. What do you keep in here? Metalworking supplies. It's a hobby. Metalworking. Jae-ho repeated slowly. He moved the scanner around the locker. The device continued beeping. This reading suggests plasma residue. You use a plasma torch. Yes, for cutting and welding small projects. Jae-ho studied him for a long moment. Tae-sung forced himself to meet the security chief's gaze without flinching. Under the bunk, he knew Hanul was holding perfectly still. The dragon was smart enough to know their lives depended on silence. Finally, Jae-ho turned off his scanner. Carry on, veteran. Keep up the good work. He left without another word. But something in his expression made Tae-sung's stomach sink. Jae-ho didn't believe the metalworking story. He was suspicious. He just hadn't found proof yet. Tae-sung closed the door and leaned against it, his legs shaking. Hanul crawled out from under the bunk and pressed against his leg, making worried sounds. It's okay, Tae-sung whispered, though he wasn't sure that was true. We're okay, for now. That night, Boram came over in a rush. She looked worried, more worried than Tae-sung had ever seen her. We have a bigger problem, she said, closing the door quickly behind her. There's a new scientist on the station. Her name is Young-mi. She's a xenobiologist. So, so she specializes in dragon research, and she's been asking questions about protected species protocols, specifically about unregistered dragons in the sector. Taesung felt cold. She knows. She suspects something. She's been tracking the same energy signatures that brought Jeho to your door, and she's persistent, really persistent. Hanul had been listening to their conversation. The dragon walked over to his writing board, something Boram had brought him weeks ago. He'd learned to scratch out basic symbols and words with his claws. Now, he carefully wrote something and showed it to them. The message read, "Danger. Me hide." Taesung's chest ached. Hanul understood he was putting them at risk. The dragon was offering to hide permanently, to make himself smaller, to disappear. "No," Taesung said firmly. "You're not hiding anymore. We'll figure something else out." Boram paced a small room. There might be a way. If we could prove Hanul is special, if we could show his intelligence, maybe we could get him reclassified as a research subject instead of a defective specimen. Would that work? Maybe, but it means going public. It means risking everything. And there's no guarantee the council would approve it. What's the alternative? We could try to smuggle him off station. Get him to a colony world where the regulations are looser. But that's incredibly risky. And expensive. Taesung looked at Hanul. The dragon was watching them both with those ancient, understanding eyes. He'd grown so much. He was smart and funny and affectionate. He trusted Taesung completely. "I won't let them take you," Taesung promised. "Whatever we have to do, we'll do it." Before Boram could respond, the door chime rang again. All three of them froze. It was late. Nobody visited this late. Taesung motioned for Hanul to get under the bunk. The dragon obeyed instantly. Boram stood near the table, trying to look casual, like she was just visiting a friend. Taesung opened the door. Jeho stood there again, but this time he had two security officers with him. His face was stern and unreadable. "Step aside, veteran," Jeho said. "I have authorization for a full search." There was no choice. Taesung moved aside. His mind raced, trying to think of something, anything that could help, but there was nothing. They were caught. Jeho walked directly to the storage locker and opened it. Empty. Then he moved to the bunk. He bent down to look underneath. Hanul stared back at him, those violet-silver scales catching the light. The two security officers moved forward, but Jeho held up his hand, stopping them. He stood up slowly, his face showing no emotion. The room was completely silent, except for Hanul's soft breathing. "You too," Jeho said to his officers. "Wait outside. I need to speak with a veteran privately." The officers looked confused, but obeyed. They left, and the door closed behind them. Jeho stood there, looking at Taesung, then at Boram, then back at Taesung. "I lost my son in the frontier wars," Jeho said quietly. His stern expression had cracked slightly, showing something underneath. Pain, maybe? Old grief. "He was in your unit, Taesung. Private Jimin." Taesung's breath caught. He remembered. A young soldier, barely 20 years old. Bright and eager, and so very young. He'd been hit by plasma fired during the Battle of Proxima 7. Taesung had worked on him for hours, trying everything. But the wounds were too severe. "You held his hand when he died." Jeho continued, his voice rough. "You told him he'd been brave. You stayed with him until the end. Even though the battle was still happening around you. He wrote about you in his letters home. Said you were the best man he'd ever known. Said you'd save anyone, even if it cost you everything." Taesung's throat was too tight to speak. Memories flooded back. Jae-min's face. His last words. The way his hand had gone slack in Taesung's grip. Jeho looked at Hanul, who had crawled out from under the bunk and was standing protectively near Taesung. The security chief's expression softened slightly. "I'm officially reporting a false alarm," Jeho said. "The energy signatures were equipment malfunction, but my superiors won't accept that excuse for long. They'll send someone else to investigate. Someone who didn't lose a son that you tried to save." He walked to the door, then paused. "Whatever you're planning, do it quickly. You have maybe 72 hours before they send another team. And next time, I won't be able to help." He left without waiting for a response. Tae-sung stood frozen, processing what had just happened. Bo-Ram let out a long breath she'd been holding. Hanul pressed against Tae-sung's leg, purring softly, trying to comfort him. 72 hours, Bo-Ram said. "We need to move fast." Tae-sung nodded, finally finding his voice. "Then we go public. We show them what Hanul can do. We make them see that he's not defective. He's extraordinary. It's risky. Everything's risky now." Tae-sung looked down at Hanul. "But he deserves a chance. A real chance. Not hiding. Not running. A chance to live." Hanul's ancient eyes met his, full of trust and understanding. The dragon knew what was coming, knew that everything was about to change, but they were together, and that had to be enough. Young Mi was more persistent than anyone had expected. The xenobiologist had only been on the station for 2 weeks, but she'd already traced energy signatures through 3 different sections. She interviewed maintenance workers, cross-referenced supply orders, and studied every piece of data she could access. Her research focused on dragon cognition and rehabilitation. She believed that damaged dragons deserved the same care and protection as healthy ones. Bo-Ram discovered this when Young Mi started asking questions about the medical supply orders. Unusual requests for veterinary supplements, heating equipment that didn't match any registered animals on the station. The young scientist was smart and determined. "We need to talk to her," Bo-Ram told Tae-sung the next morning. They only had 2 days left before Station Command would send another investigation team. "If she's going to find out anyway, better it's on our terms." "Can we trust her?" Tae-sung asked, watching Hanul practice writing on his board. The dragon had learned to write complete sentences now, his intelligence growing every day. "I think so. Everything I've learned about her suggests she actually cares about dragon welfare. She's not just following protocols. She wants to help them." That afternoon, Bo-Ram brought Young Mi to her own quarters. The scientist was younger than Tae-sung had expected, maybe 30 years old, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked nervous but excited. "Dr. Bo-Ram said you had something important to show me." Young Mi said, "Something about dragon research." "Not research," Bo-Ram replied. "Something better. But you need to promise that what you see stays between us until we're ready to go public." Young Mi's eyes widened with understanding. "You have a dragon, an unregistered dragon. Will you promise?" The scientist hesitated for only a moment. "Yes, I promise. Where is it?" Bo-Ram led her to a back room where Hanul was waiting with Tae-sung. The dragon sat calmly, though his body language showed he was nervous. He'd never met a stranger before, not since Tae-sung had found him. Young Mi stopped in the doorway. Her professional expression cracked immediately. She stared at Hanul, taking in every detail. The violet silver scales, the one perfect wing, and one twisted wing. The intelligent eyes that watched her just as carefully as she watched him. "Oh, my stars," she whispered. She dropped to her knees, tears forming in her eyes. "Do you know how rare this is? Wing deformities in dragons are extremely uncommon, and survivors like him are even more rare." "Why?" Tae-sung asked. "Because they're usually destroyed at birth. Breeders and handlers don't want to waste resources on dragons that can't fly. They're considered defective merchandise." Young Mi's voice shook with anger. "But that's completely wrong. Dragons with wing deformities often develop enhanced cognitive abilities to compensate. They become smarter, more adaptable. This one should be celebrated, not hidden or destroyed." Hanul tilted his head, studying Young Mi. Then he reached for his writing board and carefully scratched out a message with his claw. He held it up for her to see. The message read, "You study dragons. You help dragons." Young Mi's hands flew to her mouth. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. "He writes. He communicates. Do you understand what this means?" She looked at Tae-sung and Bo-Ram. Normal dragon hatchlings his age can barely understand simple commands. But he's writing complex questions. He's probably twice as intelligent as a normal dragon. Maybe more. So he's not defective, Tae-sung said quietly. Defective? Young-mi's voice rose with emotion. He's extraordinary. He's exactly what I've been trying to prove in my research. Dragons don't need wings to have value. They don't need to be perfect to deserve life. She wiped her eyes and turned back to Hanul. What's his name? Hanul, Tae-sung answered. Sky. Young-mi translated, understanding the irony. That's beautiful. She moved closer to Hanul slowly, respectfully. The dragon watched her but didn't back away. When she extended her hand, Hanul sniffed it carefully, then pressed his snout against her palm. Hello, Hanul, she said softly. I'm so glad you survived. Over the next hour, Young-mi examined Hanul thoroughly but gently. She asked permission for everything, treating the dragon with a respect that made Tae-sung trust her more. She measured his growth, tested his reflexes, observed how he moved and communicated. We need to present him to the Galactic Conservation Council. Young-mi finally said, if we can prove his enhanced intelligence, they'll reclassify him as a protected research subject. He'll be safe, more than safe. He'll be valued. But it means going public, Bo-Ram said, revealing everything. It's our only option, Young-mi replied. The alternative is they find him anyway, and then there's no chance to argue for his protection. At least this way, we control the narrative. How much time do we need? Tae-sung asked. I can compile my research documentation in 24 hours. We'll need medical records from Bo-Ram, and we'll need to demonstrate Hanul's abilities directly to the council members. Hanul had been listening to everything. He wrote another message, scared. But trust you. Tae-sung felt his chest tighten. This dragon trusted him completely, even when facing something terrifying, even when the outcome was uncertain. We'll be with you the whole time, Tae-sung promised. No matter what happens. The next day moved in a blur. Young-mi worked frantically on her documentation. Bo-Ram compiled months of medical records, showing Hanul's growth and development. Tae-sung practiced with Hanul, preparing him for what was coming. The dragon would need to demonstrate his intelligence clearly. Everything depended on making a strong impression. The presentation was scheduled for the following morning. The main conference hall had been prepared. Council representatives from 6 different worlds would attend through Quantum Link, their holographic forms appearing in chairs around the room. Station command would be present in person. Tae-sung barely slept that night. He lay on his bunk, and Hanul curled up beside him instead of in his nest. The dragon's purring was louder than usual, a sign of nervousness. What if they don't listen? Tae-sung whispered into the darkness. Hanul shifted, pressing closer. Then he reached for the writing board. He'd insisted on keeping near the bunk. Even in the dim light, Tae-sung could read what he wrote. You saved me once. You'll save me again. I believe in you. Those words kept Tae-sung company through the long night. Morning came too quickly. They gathered in the conference hall early. The room was large and intimidating, designed for important meetings. Holographic projectors hummed softly, waiting to display the council members. Young-mi was already there, setting up her presentation materials. Bo-Ram arrived with additional data files. Jae-ho stood near the back of the room, not in his official capacity, but as a silent observer. He nodded once at Tae-sung, a gesture of support. 5 of them looked interested, but cautious. The 6th, an older man identified as Counselor Hyun-woo, looked stern and disapproving. Tae-sung's stomach sank. He recognized that expression. It was the face of someone who'd already made up his mind. Station Commander Dao-su opened the proceedings, explaining the unusual nature of this presentation. Then Young-mi stepped forward and began her case. She was brilliant. She presented her research clearly, explaining how wing deformities in dragons often led to enhanced cognitive development. She showed videos of Hanul solving puzzles, understanding multiple languages, demonstrating problem-solving skills far beyond his age. She argued passionately about the value of intelligence over physical perfection. The council members watched, some leaning forward with interest, but Counselor Hyun-woo's expression never changed. Then it was time for Hanul himself. Tae-sung led the dragon to the center of the platform. Hanul moved confidently, his head held high despite his twisted wing. The dragon's scales shimmered under the lights, beautiful and strange. Youngmi demonstrated several tests. Hanul completed each one perfectly, showing his intelligence clearly. The council members murmured to each other, impressed. Then Counselor Hyunwoo spoke for the first time. His voice was cold and sharp. Why should we value intelligence over physical perfection? Dragons are meant to fly. This creature is fundamentally broken. What purpose does a flightless dragon serve? The room fell silent. Youngmi started to respond, but before she could, something unexpected happened. Hanul stepped forward. He moved to the writing board that had been set up for the demonstration. With careful, deliberate movements, he began to write, not simple words this time. Complete thoughts, flowing sentences in multiple languages. Not broken, different, value not in wings but in mind and heart. Humans understand this. Why dragons must fly to matter. Taesung saved me not because I could be useful, because life has value. This is humanity's gift. Seeing worth where others see waste. If I die for having wrong wings, what message does galaxy send? That only perfect lives deserve living? That being different means being disposable. The words appeared on the large display screens around the room as Hanul wrote. The dragon continued, his message growing more powerful. I cannot fly. True, but I can think. I can feel. I can love the person who saved me. I can learn and grow and contribute. My wings are broken, but my spirit is not. Judge me by what I am, not by what I cannot do. This is what I ask. This is what I deserve. This is what all living things deserve. By the time Hanul finished, several council members were leaning forward in their seats. Even the station staff members watching from the sides looked moved. Counselor Hyunwoo sat very still. His stern expression had cracked. He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, something had changed in his face. My grandson was born with genetic condition, he said quietly, his harsh tone gone. He will never walk. But he is the brightest child I have ever known. He teaches me every day that perfection is a lie we tell ourselves to avoid seeing real value. The counselor looked directly at Hanul. Young dragon, you have made your case better than any advocate could. You have shown us not just intelligence, but wisdom that is rarer than any perfect wing. He turned to address the other council members. I'm moved to reclassify this dragon as a protected research subject, enhanced cognitive variant. All in favor? One by one, every council member raised their hand. The vote was unanimous. The conference hall erupted with noise after the vote. Council members spoke excitedly to each other through their holographic connections. Station staff members who had watched the presentation were talking in amazed voices. Youngmi was immediately surrounded by scientists wanting to discuss Hanul's development. Boram stood off to the side, smiling with relief, but Taesung noticed none of it. He stood next to Hanul, watching the dragon receive attention from dozens of strangers. Everyone wanted to meet him now. Everyone wanted to study him, work with him, learn from him. The dragon, who had been marked for disposal, was now the center of attention. Youngmi was offered a formal research position on the spot, with Hanul as her primary subject. Boram received official commendation for her medical documentation. Even Jeho was quietly acknowledged for his thorough investigation that led to this discovery. Everyone was celebrating. Everyone except Taesung. He quietly slipped away from the crowd and returned to his small quarters in Section D. The room felt empty now. Hanul's nest under the bunk was still there. His writing board rested against the wall. His food bowl sat in the corner. But the dragon himself was still at the conference hall, surrounded by people who wanted to examine him, measure him, document everything about him. Taesung sat on the floor, his back against the bunk. This was what he'd wanted, wasn't it? Hanul was safe now, protected, valued. No one could hurt him or throw him away. The dragon would receive proper care from people who actually knew what they were doing, not just a broken veteran trying his best. So why did Taesung's chest feel hollow? The door chimed several hours later. Taesung had been sitting in the same spot, lost in thought. He opened the door to find Hanul standing there with Youngmi and Boram behind him. The dragon immediately rushed inside and pressed against Taesung's leg, making his familiar purring sound. Taesung's hand automatically moved to touch Hanul's head, feeling the warm scales under his scarred fingers. He insisted on coming back here, Young Mi said gently. He refused to go to the temporary habitat we set up. He kept writing your name. Boram entered and closed the door behind them. She looked at Taesung with concern. You left without saying anything. Everyone was busy, Taesung said quietly. I didn't want to interrupt. You're upset, Boram observed. Taesung wanted to deny it. But what was the point? I'm glad he's safe. That's what matters. But Young Mi prompted softly. He was silent for a long moment. Hanul had moved to his writing board. The dragon wrote something and held it up. You sad. Why? Taesung's throat felt tight. I'm not sad. I'm glad you're safe, that you'll be protected now. But Hanul wrote, But you won't need me anymore, Taesung finally admitted. The words came out rough and painful. They'll give you proper handlers. Trainers who know what they're doing. Scientists who understand dragons. You'll have everything you need. Everything you deserve. Hanul's ancient eyes studied him for a long moment. Then the dragon moved closer, pressing his scale head against Taesung's scarred hand. It was the same gesture he'd made that first night, when he was just a tiny hatchling in a disposal crate. The dragon returned to his board and wrote carefully, taking his time with each word. You saved me, not because you knew dragon science, because you knew what being thrown away feels like. You understood, still understand, still need you. Please don't leave me like others did. The words hit Taesung harder than any weapon ever had. His vision blurred with tears he'd been holding back for months. For years, really. Since the war. Since losing his unit. Since believing he was too broken to save anything. I'm not going anywhere, he whispered, and felt the truth of it settle deep in his chest. I promise. Young Mi cleared her throat softly. For what it's worth, the council specifically requested that you remain as Hanul's primary handler. They recognize that your bond is part of what makes him so special. I'll be his research supervisor, but you'll still be the one he lives with, if that's what you both want. It is, Taesung said without hesitation. Good. Young Mi smiled, because honestly, I don't think he'd cooperate with anyone else anyway. Over the next few weeks, everything changed, but somehow stayed the same. A proper dragon research facility was built on the station, with Orbital Station Harmony becoming a center for xenobiological conservation. Young Mi's work with Hanul opened new understanding about dragon intelligence and adaptation. Scientists came from across the galaxy to observe and learn, but every evening Hanul returned to Section D, to the small quarters where a veteran had once hidden him in a storage locker. The station had offered Taesung larger accommodations, but he'd refused. This was home. This was where their story had begun. Taesung's job changed too. He was officially hired as Hanul's primary handler, though he barely understood what that meant. Mostly, he just continued doing what he'd always done, feeding Hanul, talking with him, sitting together in comfortable silence. The dragon had grown large now, the size of a small horse, but he still pressed his head against Taesung's hand the same way. Boram visited often, bringing supplies and staying for card games. Hanul always participated now, his intelligence making him a formidable player. Jo stopped by occasionally too, never saying much but always nodded with approval at what Taesung and Hanul had built together. Young Mi spent her days documenting Hanul's development. The dragon's intelligence continued to amaze everyone. He'd learned to write in 7 languages. He could solve complex puzzles designed for adult humans. He understood abstract concepts like justice, friendship, and sacrifice. His twisted wing had never grown properly, but his mind had developed far beyond any normal dragon. 6 months after the council presentation, Taesung sat in his quarters after a long day. Hanul lay beside him, the dragon's good wing draped protectively across his shoulders. They were reading together from a datapad, something they did most evenings now. Hanul had developed a love for old human stories about heroes and adventures. Boram arrived for their weekly card game. She paused in the doorway, smiling at the sight of them. "You too look comfortable," she said. Tae-sung looked up, and Bo-Ram caught her breath. It was still strange to see him smile. For 5 years after the war, she'd known him as a hollow man going through motions. But now there was life in his eyes again. Purpose. Peace, even. "We are," Tae-sung said simply. They played cards while Hanul watched and occasionally pointed out good plays with his claw. The dragon had gotten quite good at the game. At one point, Bo-Ram accused him of counting cards, and Hanul's scales shimmered with what could only be described as amusement. After Bo-Ram left, Tae-sung prepared for sleep. Hanul had his own habitat now at the research facility, a large space designed specifically for his needs. But he still spent most nights here, curled up in his nest under the bunk. Before settling down, Hanul wrote one more message on his board. He'd gotten in the habit of leaving Tae-sung a thought before sleep, something to reflect on. Tonight's message read, "Family." Just one word, but it said everything. Tae-sung looked at the dragon, this impossible creature who'd been thrown away as defective, this being who'd been deemed worthless by people who only value perfection, this small life that had somehow saved a broken veteran as much as the veteran had saved him. "Yeah," Tae-sung agreed softly. "Family." He turned off the lights and lay down on his bunk. Through the small window, stars turned slowly against the darkness of space. The station continued its endless orbit, home to thousands of beings from dozens of worlds. Somewhere on board, scientists were writing papers about dragon cognition. Somewhere, council members were updating protection laws. Somewhere, the galaxy was slowly learning that worth wasn't measured in wings or perfection. But here, in this small room in Section D, none of that mattered. Here was just a human and a dragon who'd both been broken by the universe. Both had been marked as failures by different standards. Both had been told they didn't matter. And both had proven everyone wrong by finding each other. Hanul's purring filled the quiet room, that sound like distant thunder that Tae-sung had grown to love. It was the sound of contentment, of safety, of home. Tae-sung closed his eyes and, for the first time in years, didn't dream about the war, didn't see the faces of soldiers he couldn't save. Instead, he dreamed about a small dragon in a disposal crate, looking up at him with ancient eyes. He dreamed about the moment he'd made the choice to save one small life. That choice had saved him too. Outside, the universe continued spinning. Inside, two beings who'd found each other in the darkness rested peacefully. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be more research, more presentations, more people wanting to study the extraordinary dragon. There would be forms to fill out and protocols to follow. But tonight, they were just Tae-sung and Hanul, veteran and dragon, handler and friend, family. The word Hanul had written glowed softly in the darkness from the bioluminescence of his writing board. It was the last thing Tae-sung saw before sleep finally took him, and it was perfect. In the end, survival wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about having wings that worked or bodies that weren't scarred. It wasn't about following every rule or meeting every standard. Survival was about finding someone who saw you as worth saving and choosing every single day to save them back. This was humanity's gift to the galaxy, not superior technology or military might, not diplomatic skill or economic power. It was a simple, stubborn, impossible choice to value life regardless of its usefulness, to see worth where others saw waste, to protect the vulnerable not because it was easy or profitable, but because it was right. Tae-sung had learned this lesson in the worst possible way during the war. He'd lost everything trying to save everyone. He'd carried guilt and grief for years, believing he'd failed. But he hadn't failed Hanul. And in saving this one small dragon, he'd finally saved himself. The station lights dimmed for night cycle. Life continued in all its messy, complicated glory. And in a small room in Section D, a broken veteran and a broken dragon slept peacefully, proving every day that being different wasn't the same as being defective. That love and loyalty weren't measured in wings or scars. That family was what you made it. And that sometimes the most important act of rebellion was simply refusing to give up on someone the world had thrown away.